I'm Fonzo.
And I'm Eliza.
And we're the co-host of Grown, a podcast from the Moth that shows we're never fully grown.
Growing up feels like a phase that should end at some point, but does it ever really? Whether you're 16 or 26 or 86, you're gonna have to deal with family drama, your body, and the type of person you want to be. So why not put it all out in the open and go through it together?
Join us every other week to deal with cringe, culture, and the courageous efforts of people like you to get grown.
Start listening today. Follow Grown on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.
The Rows are a tea-drinking family. My mom averages about 5 cups a day and is the proud owner of 30 different teapots. I grew up on English black tea made with ginger and chai masala. But in college, I turned my back on my roots in a big way. I started drinking coffee. At first, it was occasional when I needed to stay up late to finish a paper or wanted a jolt to make it through a Friday morning class. But by the time I was out in the world adulting at my first journalism job, I was drinking at least 2 cups a day. Coffee just comes with the job title. It's not right to abstain in this profession. But lately, I've been faced with a serious conundrum. Coffee is hurting my body, literally. I've had acid reflux on and off for about 3 months, and all signs are pointing to coffee as a major contributing factor. Coffee is delicious, interesting, and complex, and I want to be a part of coffee culture. So what is a gal to do? This is Embodied, our show tackling sex, relationships, and your health. I'm Anita Rao.
The black coffee can have important effects on esophageal function and gastric function. And people who are sensitive, then this can become troublesome.
The upside of my coffee conundrum is that there are no shortage of stomach experts in my life. You just heard from one of them, my dad. For those of you who are newer to Embodied and haven't met him yet, he's a professor of medicine at Augusta University and a specialist in gastroenterology. He's one of 2 gastroenterologists I have on speed dial. The other is my brother-in-law. Conversations with both of them are helping me find a workable solution, but have also made me really curious about the science of coffee and how it affects our body from top to bottom. So we know that coffee affects the gut somehow, but the burning question that everyone has is about coffee and poop. And when we started looking this up as a team, we realized that your name actually kept popping up. So it turns out you were one of the first people to really study this. So take me back to the 90s and the experiment that you ran on coffee.
When I first came to US, I was very intrigued by the amount of coffee that people take. And when I started encountering patients, they would say, well, doc, if I drink a cup of coffee, that makes me go to poo. I said, okay, but there is no evidence of this in the literature. So we decided to study carefully and methodically, does coffee have a stimulant effect on the gut? And if so, how does it compare with decaf coffee? And how would it compare with a meal? And so on. So we designed an experiment to really study this.
And what did you find out?
So we found that caffeine coffee has as much potent effect in stimulating colonic motility as a meal. Meal is by far one of the strongest physiological stimulants for gut motility, particularly colonic motility. But the effects of a meal can last between 2 to 4 hours. But for the first hour, the effect of coffee is almost as equal to the effect of a strong meal. There is also an effect of decaf coffee, but that's about half that of regular black caffeine-containing coffee. And hot water has very minimal stimulant effect on the colon.
So coffee increases the contractions in your gut that pushes the stool to the rectum. It causes this whole system to really wake up, it goes to the small intestine, to the colon, you eventually have a bowel movement. So we have a sense of what coffee does to the gut and the colon, but there's still this open question about why coffee has this effect, and we're not exactly sure. So tell me about some of the prevailing theories.
So I think it is unclear precisely which ingredient in coffee is really contributing to this. But as I said, coffee has many components, including theophylline, which is also a component that is present in tea. And theophylline and caffeine have potent effects on gut motility. They increase gut motility. And some of these effects are directly as the coffee or tea goes through the gut, and some of this is indirectly after they get absorbed and through the bloodstream, they have an effect. But more precisely, which chemicals or which neurotransmitters are affecting gut motility, I don't think we fully understand.
So you say it's also important to keep in mind that there are other parts of our morning routine that could also contribute to why our colons are so revved up after that morning cup of coffee. So tell me about what's going on there. What's going on with our colon in that morning time?
So, colon is awake 24/7. But when we go to sleep, the colon also goes to sleep, but the colonic activity does not go to zero. It diminishes significantly. But as soon as we wake up in the morning, the colon activity increases almost threefold. And this response lasts for up to an hour to hour and a half. And during this time, the colon also induces very strong contractile events called high amplitude propagating contractions or HAPCs that move a large column of stool and deliver it into the rectum, which in many people then induces a desire to go and have a bowel movement. So, this is often the trigger for early morning bowel movement. And this is really an inbuilt biorhythm that is active in most of us. In some people, it could be a little later in the day, some people, it's in the evening, but this is one of the natural triggers of bowel movement.
So the bowel is moving, the bowel reacts, but there's in the stomach, I guess, before we're getting to the colon, the stomach has a response to coffee where it creates this increased level of gastric acid. Is this why coffee can lead to acid reflux and digestion, or help me understand why it is that folks have some trouble with coffee?
So, coffee has at least a dual effect in the stomach. One, the effect of coffee and its contents in stimulating acid and gastrin production in the stomach. And the second is a kind of a direct effect again of caffeine and coffee on stomach motility and lower esophageal sphincter function. So the LES or the lower esophageal sphincter is like a one-way valve system that allows food or drinks to go down from the food pipe or the esophagus into the stomach, but stops material from the stomach backing up or refluxing back into the esophagus. But several experiments have been done where we have carefully assessed the LES function before and after coffee intake, and we have seen that the lower esophageal sphincter becomes temporarily or transiently weak after intake of coffee. So the LES becomes more relaxed after coffee, and this allows more of the contents of the stomach to reflux into the esophagus, leading to heartburn or acid reflux symptoms.
There you have it. My lower esophageal sphincter weakness is currently really cramping my coffee habit. Thanks, Dad. And we'll be talking more about that soon.
I'm Eric Hodge, host of Morning Edition here at WUNC, and I have a deeply meaningful relationship with coffee. I love the smell when you open the bag, and I love the smell when you grind it, and the smell that blooms in the room when you add all that hot water. I get to work at about 4 in the morning, but I don't make coffee until about 5:30, so I guess I'm not really using it to wake up. although it does make me feel a little sharper and maybe a bit more alert.
I try to deny that coffee has any impact on my mood, but my husband jokes, kind of, that we need to get coffee in me if I seem to be having an off morning. And if I'm being completely honest, it usually does help, because most of the time I feel that rush of energy or that even pure joy feeling about halfway through my cup, which kind of sounds weird now that I say it, but it's true.
When I can manage to do it, it's a nice way to start the day just by focusing on the coffee and the morning light and the quiet before the day gets going.
I would definitely consider coffee one of my best friends. That's the best way I could describe the relationship. Love drinking coffee everywhere, out at cafes with friends. Really, the place doesn't matter, but for me, coffee is definitely a ritual. I do enjoy it alone, but I really also enjoy it. And the associations of coffee, probably that's why I love coffee. I say coffee is one of my best friends because I usually enjoy it with my best friends now that I actually think about it.
That's Eric Hodge, Kara, Jacob, and Ellie. They, like the majority of Americans, are coffee lovers. Our country consumes more of the substance than anywhere else in the world, like 400 million cups a day. According to many pop science articles that pop up on my news feed, this habit is good for our health. But how true is that? I put my questions to an expert who you may recognize from her viral YouTube series.
The majority of Americans are addicted to caffeine, but have you ever wondered what exactly is going on in your body as you desperately grab for that cup of coffee in the morning? I'm Shannon, and I'm a neuroscience PhD candidate, and this is your Brain on Caffeine.
Shannon Odell knows her science and how to separate the signal from the noise.
I feel like I am constantly seeing it on my Twitter feed, like a new study shows caffeine does X, Y, and Z, or coffee does X, Y, and Z. So when we think of a typical scientific study, we would think like, okay, we give people coffee, twice a day for 3 years. What happens to them? We're not doing that. A lot of these studies are what we call observational studies. So in an observational study, what you do is you basically take a large cohort of people and you ask them lots of questions. You might trace them over a long period of time. You're not manipulating any kind of variable, right? A lot of these kind of coffee reduces your risk for XYZ come from these observational studies where we're basically just asking a bunch of questions. We're trying to, make sure that we control for things like lifestyle or age or all these other variables. But with that, there's always the chance that we're missing something. So we can't exactly show causation with observational studies. That said, with coffee, there are a lot of observational studies. So I think that is promising in itself, right? When you're getting the same result over and over and over again, that seems to show that there's probably some evidence there, but still we don't have the exact causation down.
So we aren't sure that it's long-term coffee consumption in particular that's causing your brain fog to clear or helping your heart. But what we do know with great precision is how coffee operates in your body short-term.
So caffeine works on the adenosine system in the brain. So what is adenosine? As our bodies are kind of going through their day-to-day functions, it utilizes energy in the form of this molecule called ATP. And that molecule gets broken down, and that's why we have the energy that we have. And when that gets broken down, it releases this molecule called adenosine. So adenosine is almost a marker of all the energy that we're using throughout the day. And what happens is when this adenosine builds up, it binds to these receptors in the brain called adenosine receptors. And what it does is it actually signals sleepiness. It kind of makes sense why we get tired throughout the day. And especially on days when we're like utilizing a lot of energy, we're extra tired. We're feeling extra sleepy. So what caffeine does is it actually binds to adenosine receptors. It just sits on the adenosine receptors and doesn't let adenosine make its way through. It's called a competitive antagonist. So what it does is it blocks the action of adenosine, allowing us to stay alert and awake.
Okay, so caffeine basically prevents the sleepiness effect from hitting the body. And we all know that physical experience of that feeling of being extra alert after a cup of coffee. And that's also because coffee kind of activates our fight or flight response. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So caffeine is an awesome molecule in that it can do a lot of different things. Caffeine can also act peripherally. It can prevent the breakdown of a certain messenger in the body known as cyclic AMP. It tells your body to produce epinephrine and norepinephrine, those adrenaline and noradrenaline molecules. So by caffeine preventing the breakdown of cyclic AMP, you're getting this increase of this epinephrine and norepinephrine, aka that fight or flight response. So that's why you feel those caffeine jitters. I know I'm even feeling them right now. I kind of had a lot of caffeine this morning. So I can even feel it in my own hand as I'm talking.
So tell me about that. I mean, what the science behind how caffeine affects our bodies differently. Because you could have a cup of coffee and I could have a cup of coffee, and an hour later we might be in very different states of mind. So talk to me about why it's so different person to person.
Yeah, it's incredibly different person to person. And I think sometimes people don't realize that. So they see someone, who doesn't drink coffee in the morning. They're like, how do they do that?
Yeah.
Or, they see someone who drinks 3 cups of coffee and they're, a 1 cup of coffee person. So it's because of genetics and also our experience with coffee. So people are going to metabolize coffee at different rates. So that's going to affect how long coffee stays in your bloodstream. But there's a lot of diversity in maybe how many adenosine receptors that you have in your brain. And that can be affected also by your experience with coffee. So yeah, it's very different person to person.
As we've been saying, there are many other compounds in coffee in addition to caffeine. If we want to get real sciencey, there are more than 1,000 chemical compounds in coffee, and some of those are antioxidants. I know that antioxidants are good for me, and I know that they're in blueberries, but my knowledge stops there. So back to Shannon.
You hear the word antioxidants, you say, okay, good, I want that. And what goes hand in hand with antioxidants are these things called free radicals. And I think we hear free radicals and we think, okay, I don't know what those are, but those are bad. We do not want those. So what's interesting about free radicals is, they're not great, but they exist all around us. Our bodies produce free radicals. We get free radicals from the environment, free radicals from the sun. But the problem with free radicals is, to get a little bit specific and a little bit chemistry-esque, they have an unpaired electron.
Okay.
And all we need to know about that is unpaired electrons are bad. Electrons really want to be paired. So what happens is the free radical goes around our body and it's looking for an electron, and it will steal it from wherever it can find it, which is bad because then it creates a different free radical. Maybe it steals it from a cell membrane, and all of a sudden our cell membrane has 1 less electron. Maybe that changes the conformation of the cell membrane. Maybe different molecules can get into that cell membrane, right? So we don't really like free radicals because it kind of steals electrons from a different place and it kind of messes things up. And over time, this is called oxidative stress. And we know oxidative stress can be linked to a lot of different diseases, from, Alzheimer's to Parkinson's to heart disease. So the question is, where do antioxidants come into this? Well, antioxidants are great because they're basically electron donors. They have an extra electron lying around and they're happy to give it to these free radicals. And when they give it to these free radicals, it doesn't cause a problem. They don't become free radicals themselves. So what we love is when antioxidants come in and they give these free radicals. The free radicals can't mess with our body. So overall, we have this idea that antioxidants are really great for us. When we look at the data, it becomes a little bit more confusing, though. We think in theory that antioxidants are really great. And there's lots of studies that show we want to increase our antioxidants in our diet. But the nitty-gritty of how the mechanism works and how it will actually prevent disease, it's a little murky.
I wish I could carry Shannon around in my pocket and have her explain food and nutrition science whenever I needed it. Because if our deep dives on diet culture earlier this year taught me anything, It's that we should be paying as much attention to who is interpreting the data as to what the data is itself.
I think the things that you're always looking for in these studies is you want to look at what is the group size. Did they look at 100 people? Did they look at 10 people? Did they look at 100,000 people, right? So a larger group size is going to mean it's going to have a little bit more weight. Another thing you can look at is there are sometimes one-off studies versus we have these things called systematic reviews or meta-analyses. So systematic reviews and meta-analyses really hold more weight because what they're doing is they're actually looking at the effect of many studies repeated over and over and over again, and then looking at its overall effect. And then, of course, you always just want to look at, if you're looking at a headline, you always want to look at the source. Sources that are coming directly, from the scientific institutions themselves. Sometimes those can be a little inaccessible. You always want to make sure, is this article that's anti-coffee, but the article is being paid for by Big T?
Yeah, exactly.
You want to look at what kind of source this is coming from.
Big T, we've got our eyes on you.
Here, I feel like the culture is more kind of boom, boom, boom. We're on the move. Whereas in Spain, it's a lot of relaxed time, sitting, enjoying, having conversations with people, or just spending time with yourself, enjoying the coffee.
Our relationship in America with coffee is definitely very much around work and productivity. And when you go to other countries like Scandinavia, in Sweden especially, they have a word for when you're just enjoying a cup of coffee and sometimes a pastry with your friends, and it's called fika, and it's like a way of life. My parents are from Vietnam, and my dad was born in coffee country, essentially, and so over there it's much more social, and I like to say that coffee is in my blood because it literally kind of is.
You just met Melissa Malo, a listener in New York, and Daniel Everhart, a listener in Chicago. Whether you're drinking coffee to speed up or slow down, often varies from place to place. Another person who has coffee in their blood, Samuel Ongwa.
I got involved in the culture of coffee at the age of 5, 6, around 1959, actually.
Samuel was born and raised in Bamenda, Cameroon, a city in the northwestern part of the country. His family owned more than 3 acres of land. They grew food for themselves and coffee to sell. The coffee beans were ripe for harvest in the dry season, which was around November and December. It's also when most kids are outside playing soccer, and Samuel didn't always have that luxury.
With coffee culture being part of my family's source of income, it was very difficult for me to differentiate what was a priority to my parents and a priority to me. Mine would have definitely been playing with my friends.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you played with your friends and the coffee beans were not picked, you had to answer. And consequently, maybe your fees may not be paid for lack of income. Having said that, when the coffee beans are ripened for picking, you just don't go to the tree and brush off every bean you see there. You have to meticulously pick only the right beans off the branches, and those beans don't get ripened at the same time. So you can see how painstaking the process was.
Definitely. So you really had to learn at a young age the art and the science of when a bean is ripe and when's the right time to pick it, and help with your family production in that way. And
That's
so
right.
then, a number of years later, you moved to the U.S. You were trying to get an undergraduate degree at the University of Wisconsin. And you started noticing that all of these people were walking around carrying these white styrofoam cups. So tell me about this observation and what you uncovered between those folks and the link to your experience back home.
When I left Bamenda, the impact of what I was doing did not mean anything to me at all. As long as it was out of my sight, well, good riddance, But when I got to the University of Wisconsin Stout, it was still very cold. Trying to adjust to that around campus, everybody moves very fast, covered up with their coats and backpacks and then white cups in the hands. And that kind of intrigued me to know what it was that everybody had, which I wasn't used to. So in the student union halls, everybody sitting in tables also had the same thing. And thereafter, I started inquiring what was it that everybody was drinking in those cups. And hey la, it became known to me that it was coffee. Now, it's coffee? Then it dragged my mind back to what I used to do back home. And it became clear that the coffee we were picking and processing back in Bamenda ends up in far places like the University of Wisconsin student campus. So definitely it means all over the world people had coffee.
Samuel simmered on his white styrofoam cup discovery for a while, and then started to wonder exactly whose coffee cups the beans he had picked as a kid were ending up in. He began to look for some answers to that question in a business law class at Wisconsin, and then built the blueprint for the business he runs today, Safari Pride Coffee. It's a coffee roastery and distributor based in Minneapolis. But before he officially launched Safari Pride, he moved back to Cameroon to get more acquainted with the coffee process. He learned that a lot of the coffee his family had been growing was sold to Europeans as commercial-grade coffee, which undervalued the product and didn't provide enough income for the farmer. With Safari Pride, he does it differently, sourcing directly from farms and cooperatives where he knows everything about how the products are grown and tended to.
Coffee is a wonderful product affected by many factors, principally being the soil on which it is grown. If it's volcanic and rich, so ultimately will be the coffee bean that comes from that soil. Then it is greatly affected by the way the sun rises and sets, the way the wind blows in the morning and in the afternoon and evening. All of these factors play around the quality of the coffee that ends up being graded as top coffee beans from 90% to 100% grade, and below 70 being useless coffee, or, well, low quality coffee, as I would say. So all of these factors are things that got my interest to now see what Bamenda coffee is, what other coffees around the vicinity of Bamenda is, and eventually what is grown in Nigeria, what is grown in Congo, what is grown in Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, Ethiopia, all of these places which fall within the coffee belt. So with all these variations, it required me to travel to try to pick out best beans that would fit into the portfolio of Safari Pride Coffee Company. That's how I got to the stage in which I am today.
Samuel is invested in bridging the gap between his early relationship with the coffee bean and the relationship he wants people in his community to have with coffee as a product today. Another person very invested in Java, Austin Jeffries.
I started out as just a customer in a coffee shop, and I spent enough time there that the owner of the place asked if I was free to come on the other side of the counter.
Austin is the definition of a coffee head. He spent 8 years working at Tate Street Coffee House in Greensboro and managed the shop for most of that time. He has actively sought out coffee cultures all around the world.
I think, hustle culture, being on that grind, no pun intended, in America is just so prevalent. It really is kind of productivity and work blends into almost any aspect we really can. I was just in London a couple weeks ago visiting my partner there, and sitting at a table, people are chatting with their neighbors, they're meeting with their siblings, they're really taking a moment. And I found that really stark just because, I was there on vacation, but seeing people kind of in their day-to-day taking time out to really just relax, it really was apparent to me, not a laptop in sight, not having business meetings. People really just gathering seems to be a lot more apparent in other countries.
So you now have this mobile coffee cart and you set up shop in various locations around Greensboro. I'm curious about the kind of coffee culture you're trying to create with this mobile cart where you don't necessarily have the infrastructure of a coffee shop where there are seats and tables. Talk to me about how this is different.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a selfish endeavor. My business partner, Gray Johnston, and I were both born and raised in Greensboro, North Carolina. We're both huge coffee fanatics. So we started out as a passion project just to kind of, selfishly make some really great coffee for ourselves. But we love the city of Greensboro so much. It really became an opportunity to activate spaces that were lovely to be in, but may not have a draw, may not have a reason for people to really linger, relax, and connect with their community. So just about anywhere we can bring the cart and people want to be, we figure a cup of coffee isn't a bad addition to it.
Have you seen it change people's behavior instead of kind of like going in, going out, and staying on the go? Does it make people interact with the space or linger more?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we're really lucky in that everyone, no one's disappointed to see the coffee guy. So, people are always excited walking down the street, turning a corner, and suddenly there's an espresso machine. And, I could use a cup of coffee. And, being able to take a moment and reflect, catch up, and, meet somebody new is really gratifying. I mean, both, I think, for the customer and for me.
Coffee shops are third spaces. Not work, not home, a place to gather and be in community. Lord knows we all need more of that after these last few years. For Austin and Samuel, their relationship with coffee is as much about the process as it is the product, which means that we can turn to them to bridge the gap between the science and the culture, aka how do we get the best tasting and most health-promoting cup?
Samuel spoke to, origin of coffee, how much that can affect it. So I guess, like hopefully any good scientist would believe, get as large a sample size as you can. Explore different regions. There's loads of reviews, papers, critiques of different coffees. Try those. And then just be really mindful of what you're using and how that affects it. I mean, coffee, scientifically, is mostly water. Make sure you have a really pure water source, make sure you use clean equipment, and make sure you use a high quality bean, hopefully purchased directly from farmers.
I love it. Samuel, anything you'd like to add? Any observations about the science that affect how coffee tastes?
Coffee is extremely a very, very good product. It's one of the most important protectors of health. And since I discovered it drinking at the University of Wisconsin, do you believe that I don't remember which day I have gone by without at least 2 cups of coffee, minimum. It has improved my health tremendously. I've had some medical issues, but I have rebounded from them so fast. I can attribute that to the amount of coffee I drink today.
So there you have it. Sample size of 1, but a testimonial that has me convinced. And if you need more to connect the dots, I tried to pin Shannon down on the big burning question. Will regular consumption of coffee really increase my lifespan? The most important question.
Ooh. It goes against everything in me to say true or false. I can't say.
You'll say, look at the studies, get comprehensive analysis of the data, look at the sample size, and check back with you in a few years.
Exactly. And choose for yourself. If you feel like your coffee habit is going to increase your lifespan, then absolutely do it. It's not going to hurt you.
Embodied is a production of North Carolina Public Radio WUNC, a listener-supported station. If you want to lend your support to this podcast and WUNC's other shows on demand, consider a contribution at WUNC.org now. Incredible storytelling like you hear on Embodied is only possible because of listeners like you. This episode was produced by me and Audrey Smith. Kaya Finlay also produces for our show. Amanda Magnus is our editor. Jenny Lawson, our sound engineer. And Quilla wrote our theme music. If you enjoyed this show, send it to 2 of your favorite coffee lovers. You spreading the word about Embodied is what helps new folks find us, and it means so much. Until next time, I'm Anita Rao, taking on the taboo with you.